Stop wasting our time with your little hobby projects. A high school dropout who got lucky with a job here doesn't understand real innovation. My son has vision. You have. What? The ability to schedule meetings? He laughed, tearing my proposal in half without reading past the title page. Everyone in the room suddenly found something fascinating to look at on their shoes or the ceiling. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody spoke up. The silence felt like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders as I stood there. My hands still extended slightly from when I'd handed over my carefully prepared document. The $5,000 I had requested might as well have been $5 billion based on how Trevor Blake, our CEO, had reacted. I swallowed hard, fighting the burning sensation in my throat. Thank you for your consideration, I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. I turned and walked out, feeling 20 pairs of eyes finally look up to watch me leave. Before we continue any further with my story, I just want to thank you for listening. Drop a comment where you're tuning in from. I'm always curious where my voice is reaching. Now, back to that horrible day that changed everything. My name is Arwen, not after the Lord of the Rings character. My mom just liked unusual names. I'm 32, 5'4", with dark curly hair I never learned to properly style. I've worked at Precision Technologies for 7 years, starting as a receptionist and working my way up to executive assistant. I'm the person who remembers everyone's coffee order, birthday, and spouse's name. The invisible one who makes things happen without anyone noticing. What Trevor didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I'd spent years teaching myself coding, systems architecture, and product development through online courses and borrowed textbooks. Every night, after a 10-hour workday, I'd sit at my tiny kitchen table in my studio apartment and study until my vision blurred. Not for a promotion or raise, but because I was genuinely fascinated by technology and its potential to solve problems. The proposal Trevor had just destroyed represented 6 months of my life. I'd identified a major inefficiency in our client management system that was costing us thousands of monthly hours in productivity. My solution was elegant, simple, and, most importantly, cheap to implement. All I needed was a small budget to develop a prototype and time to test it. When I got back to my desk, I tried to compose myself. My hands shook slightly as I organized Trevor's afternoon meetings. 10 minutes later, I received a company-wide email calling for an emergency all-hands gathering in the main conference area. I arrived to find champagne being distributed. Trevor stood at the front, arm around his son Emery, who wore an expression of practiced modesty that didn't reach his eyes. Today marks a new chapter for our company, Trevor announced. My son has developed a revolutionary client management interface that will streamline our entire operation. The board has approved a $23 million budget to bring this vision to life. The room erupted in applause as I stood there, stunned. Emery's presentation slides appeared on the large screen, and my heart stopped. The concept was identical to mine, down to the flowchart I'd designed on page 3 of my proposal. But that was impossible unless, 3 weeks ago, I'd explained my idea to Kit, a junior developer who often ate lunch with me. We'd been in the break room, and I'd sketched out the basic architecture on a napkin, excited to share it with someone who would understand the technical aspects. I remembered Emery getting coffee nearby, but he'd seemed absorbed in his phone. He'd stolen my idea, and now he was being handed $23 million to develop it. As people gathered around Emery to congratulate him, he caught my eye across the room and smirked. Not the reaction of someone who'd coincidentally had the same idea, the smirk of someone who knew exactly what he'd done and was enjoying my powerlessness. I didn't come from money or connections. I grew up in a small farming community 2 hours away, raised by a single mom who worked as a school janitor. I dropped out of high school not because I was lazy or troubled, but because mom got sick my junior year. Someone had to work. I got my GED while working 3 jobs, then took night classes at community college whenever I could afford them. Landing the receptionist job at Precision had been a miracle. The HR person had been impressed by my determination when I showed up 5 days in a row asking about openings. I'd worked harder than anyone else. Arrived earlier, stayed later, learned every aspect of the business I could access. But none of that mattered now. In this company, in this world, Emery's last name counted more than my years of effort. His Harvard business degree, that his father had surely bought his way into, trumped my self-education. His confidence, unearned but unshakable, made my careful, researched approach look hesitant by comparison. Over the next few weeks, Emery assembled his team. He hired 3 college friends as innovation consultants, at salaries that made my eyes water. He took over the entire east wing of our floor, installing sleek furniture and the latest equipment. The original concept, my concept, quickly became buried under layers of needless complexity, as Emery added features to justify the enormous budget. I watched from my desk as experienced engineers raised concerns during meetings, only to be dismissed. Their expertise rejected for not being forward-thinking enough. Several quit. Others learned to nod and keep their doubts private. 4 months into development, whispers started. The project was behind schedule. Testing showed fundamental flaws in the architecture. The initial budget had already been exceeded. Trevor doubled down, investing more money, scheduling press and investor previews for the revolutionary product his son was creating. While this happened, I kept doing my job. I scheduled Trevor's meetings, ordered lunch for the executive team, and maintained an expression of pleasant professionalism. I listened when others spoke. I noticed every detail. I waited. On a rainy Tuesday morning, I overheard Trevor yelling at Emery behind his office door. "Fix it! The investor presentation is in 8 weeks. Make it work or we're both finished." That evening, as I was leaving, I passed the development lab. Through the glass, I saw Emery sitting alone, head in his hands, surrounded by whiteboards covered with diagrams that made no coherent sense. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I went home to my apartment, made a cup of tea, and sat at my kitchen table. My grandmother had passed away the previous year, leaving me $5,000 in her will. I'd been saving it for a real emergency, a medical crisis, or job loss. It was the only financial security I had. As I sipped my tea, I made a decision that would change everything. The next day, I requested 2 weeks of unused vacation time. Trevor approved it without even looking up from his phone, assuming I was finally taking a break after years without one. I didn't go anywhere. Instead, I converted my tiny living room into a makeshift development studio. I pushed my couch against the wall, set up my old laptop on a folding table, and began to work. My approach was different from Emery's in every way. I didn't need fancy equipment or expert consultants. I knew exactly what our clients needed because I'd been listening to them complain for years. I understood our current systems because I used them daily. I knew which features mattered and which were just flashy distractions. I worked 18 hours a day, stopping only to eat, shower, and catch a few hours of sleep. I used open-source tools, free development environments, and inexpensive cloud services. When I hit technical roadblocks, I posted anonymous questions on developer forums and studied the answers until I understood them. By the end of my vacation, I had a working prototype. It wasn't pretty, but it functioned perfectly, addressing exactly what our clients had been asking for. I spent $3,200 of my grandmother's money on essential components and services. The rest I kept in reserve for inevitable improvements. When I returned to work, nobody asked where I'd been or what I'd done. I slipped back into my role seamlessly, the invisible assistant who kept the machine running. But now I carried a secret, a small device stored in my bag that represented everything Trevor believed I couldn't create. I bided my time, watching as Emery's project continued its downward spiral. 2 more developers quit. The budget expanded again. The timeline shifted back another month. Then came the day that would normally have been the triumphant culmination of Emery's project. Instead, it became its funeral. The demonstration was scheduled for 2 p.m. in our largest presentation room. Investors had flown in from across the country. Our biggest client, Moontree Industries, sent their entire executive team. The room hummed with anticipation as Emery stood at the front, dressed in an expensive suit that seemed to swallow his increasingly thin frame. Trevor introduced his son with typical grandiosity, promising a paradigm shift in client management technology. Then he stepped aside, giving Emery the floor. What happened next unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. The system failed to launch. Emery restarted it. Error messages flashed across the projection screen. The room grew uncomfortably warm as Emery's forehead beaded with sweat. He tried bypassing the main interface, explaining that certain features were still in optimization phase. Then the entire system crashed. Not just the presentation module, everything. $23 million of development vanished in a blue screen. Technical difficulties. Trevor stepped in smoothly. Perhaps we could take a short break and— We've seen enough, said Diane Lockwood, the purchasing director from Moontree Industries. Your company has had 6 months and, from what I understand, unlimited resources to deliver what we asked for. This is unacceptable. The investors began gathering their belongings. Moontree's team huddled, speaking in low, serious tones. Emery stood frozen at the front of the room, staring at the dead screen. I should have felt satisfaction. This was the moment when Emery's theft came back to destroy him. But watching his public humiliation brought me no joy, just a hollow recognition of wasted potential and resources. After everyone left, Trevor called an emergency executive meeting. I wasn't invited, of course, but I set up the room, providing coffee and water before shutting the door. Through the glass, I watched Trevor gesture angrily while Emery sat slumped in his chair, defeated. The next morning, an announcement went out. Emery had been reassigned to strategic initiatives, corporate language for being quietly removed without the embarrassment of a firing. The project was being revamped with new leadership. No one mentioned the $23 million that had disappeared into nothing. That afternoon, Trevor called me into his office. He looked haggard, his usual confidence replaced by something close to desperation. Moontree is threatening to pull their business, he said, running a hand through his graying hair. They represent 40% of our annual revenue. We can't lose them. I nodded, waiting for instructions to schedule another meeting or prepare documents. I've arranged a private breakfast with Diane tomorrow. Last chance to salvage this relationship. Have the small meeting room ready by 7. Tell no one about this. It needs to stay quiet until we have a solution. Of course, I said. That night, I stayed late after everyone had gone home. The building felt different in the empty hours. Larger, more honest somehow. I walked through the silent hallways to the small meeting room and began preparing it meticulously. I placed notepads and pens at each seat. I set up the coffee service. I tested the presentation equipment to ensure everything worked perfectly. Then, I took my device from my bag and placed it on the center of the table. Not hidden, simply waiting to be noticed. I arrived at 6:30 the next morning, well before anyone else. I checked that everything remained as I'd left it, then stationed myself discreetly outside the room. Trevor arrived at 6:55, looking slightly better than yesterday, but still carrying tension in his shoulders. He nodded at me without really seeing me, his mind already on the conversation ahead. Diane arrived precisely at 7, accompanied by her technical director, Philip. I showed them in, offered coffee, then stepped back, expecting to be dismissed. Will that be all, Mr. Blake? I asked, following protocol. Trevor waved his hand. Yes. Close the door on your way out. I hesitated. Sir, there's something on the table that— I don't need your help arranging my meeting space, he snapped. Please leave us. I saw Diane notice my device. She picked it up, examining it with curiosity. What's this? She asked Trevor. He glanced at it, confused. I don't know. Arwen, what is that doing here? The moment had arrived sooner than I'd planned. I took a deep breath and stepped forward instead of backing away. It's a prototype, I said quietly. For the client management system Moontree requested 6 months ago. Trevor's expression darkened with anger and embarrassment. This isn't the time for— May I see it? Philip interrupted, holding out his hand. Diane passed him the device. Who developed this? Diane asked, looking directly at me for the first time. I did, I answered, simply. She's my assistant, Trevor interjected hastily. This is completely inappropriate. Does it function? Philip asked, ignoring Trevor completely. Yes, I said. Would you like a demonstration? Absolutely not. Trevor stood, his face reddening. Arwen, you're dismissed. We'll discuss this later. Diane raised her hand. I'd like to see it. The room grew very quiet. Trevor and Diane locked eyes in a silent battle of authority. After several seconds, Trevor sank back into his seat, defeated by the knowledge that he couldn't afford to alienate Moontree further. I stepped forward and turned on the device. The interface glowed to life, clean, intuitive, and responsive. I guided them through each feature, showing how it addressed the specific pain points Moontree had identified months ago. Philip tested it, trying to break it with unusual requests and commands. It performed flawlessly. The system I'd designed was resilient, adaptable, and remarkably fast. How long did this take you to develop? Diane asked when I finished. 2 weeks of concentrated work, I replied. But I've been thinking about the solution for much longer. And the budget? Philip's eyes narrowed, suspicious of the answer. $5,000, I said. My own money. Diane turned to Trevor, whose face had lost all color. You spent $23 million on a failed system, while your assistant built exactly what we needed for $5,000. Trevor attempted damage control. This is just a simple prototype. It doesn't have the scale or security features of what we were developing. It's essentially a toy compared to... It works. Philip cut him off. Everything else is just excuses. Diane stood. Mr. Blake, we came here ready to terminate our relationship with your company. Instead, I'd like to propose something different. We want to continue working with Precision Technologies, but under new terms. What terms? Trevor asked warily. We want her, Diane pointed at me, to lead the development of the full system based on this prototype. She reports directly to us on progress, with full control over the project team and budget. Trevor's mouth opened and closed several times before he found words. That's impossible. She's not qualified. She doesn't have the experience or education to... She just proved otherwise, Diane said flatly. The next hour passed in a blur as Trevor tried every argument he could think of to maintain control. Eventually, they reached a compromise. I would lead a new innovation division reporting directly to the board, with Moontree as our first client. As Diane and Philip prepared to leave, Diane paused beside me. People who can actually solve problems are rare, she said quietly. Don't let anyone convince you that you're less than what you've proven yourself to be. They left, and Trevor and I were alone in the meeting room. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything that had changed in the last hour. You went behind my back, he finally said, his voice low and dangerous. Yes, I admitted. After you went behind mine. His eyes widened slightly. I know Emery stole my idea, I continued. The one you tore up without reading. The one you later funded for $23 million when it came from him instead of me. You can't prove that, he said, but his eyes shifted away from mine. I don't need to prove it anymore, I replied. The results speak for themselves. Trevor stood, straightening his jacket with a sharp tug. This isn't over, he said. The board hasn't approved anything yet. You're still just an assistant who's forgotten her place. Maybe, I conceded. Or maybe, I've finally found it. As he stormed out, I remained seated, letting the reality of what had just happened wash over me. I'd risked everything. My savings, my job security, my carefully maintained invisible existence. On this moment, I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Sorrow for what could have been if Trevor had simply read my proposal that first day. How much time, money, and heartache could have been saved? How much more could we have accomplished together rather than as adversaries? But that path had closed the moment he tore my proposal in half. Now we were on a different road entirely, and I had no idea where it would lead. My phone pinged with an email from Diane. Contract terms attached. Review and respond by end of day. Looking forward to working with you directly. I took a deep breath and stood up. I had work to do. The board meeting where my new role was officially approved took place 3 days later. I sat at the far end of the long wooden table, wearing the best outfit I owned, a navy dress from a discount store that I'd altered myself to fit better. 11 board members examined me with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Trevor sat opposite me, his gaze coldly fixed on a point just above my head. Let's be clear, said board chairman Victor Reese. This arrangement is highly unusual, but Moontree's ultimatum left us little choice. I understand, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Thank you for the opportunity. You'll have a 6-month trial period, Victor continued. You'll receive resources to build a small team and develop your system for full deployment. If successful, the position becomes permanent. If not, he let the sentence hang unfinished. I won't disappoint you, I said. As the meeting ended, Trevor paused beside my chair. Congratulations, he said, voice dripping with insincerity. I hope you realize what you've gotten yourself into. This isn't scheduling meetings anymore. When you fail, and you will fail, remember it was your choice to reach beyond your capabilities. I met his eyes. Thank you for the encouragement. I'll keep that in mind. The first month was harder than I'd imagined. I received an office, not large, but with a window, and a budget to hire 3 team members. But word had spread quickly about how I'd gotten the position, creating 2 distinct narratives. I was either an underdog genius who'd humiliated the CEO's son, or I was sleeping with someone at Moontree. Neither made finding qualified team members easy. The first 2 developers I interviewed declined the positions after mysteriously receiving better offers elsewhere. The third accepted, then quit after 2 days, citing a toxic environment. I later learned Trevor had spoken with him privately. I adapted. Instead of looking within the company, I reached out to my online network, people who knew my work, but not my title. I found Kit, the junior developer who'd been kind to me before, and discovered he'd quit after Emery's project collapsed. I offered him a position, and he accepted immediately. Through Kit, I connected with Leona, a brilliant systems architect who'd been passed over repeatedly for promotion at her previous company. She joined after a single video call, saying simply, "I've had enough of men taking credit for women's ideas." My third hire was Damon, a college dropout like me, who'd built his coding knowledge through relentless self-education. His work was unorthodox but effective. Traditional doesn't always mean better, he told me during his interview. I hired him on the spot. We worked in our small office, often late into the night. Our door remained closed, our conversations quiet. We created our own culture of respect and collaboration, so different from the hierarchical structure of the main company. 2 months in, we delivered our first working version to Moontree. Diane tested it personally, then signed off on Phase 1 funding for the full deployment. That same afternoon, I received an email from building management. Our team was being relocated to make room for expansion of executive facilities. Our new space was in the basement, next to the building's mechanical room. The noise from the heating system made conversation difficult. The Wi-Fi barely worked. There was one small window at the ceiling level that showed people's feet walking by outside. "This is ridiculous," Kit fumed, setting up his workstation in the dismal space. "They're trying to bury us." "They're trying to make us quit," I corrected. "There's a difference." We adapted again. We brought in our own router. We wore noise-canceling headphones. We decorated the concrete walls with whiteboards and filled them with code and diagrams. When the air conditioning stopped working in our room, just our room, during a heat wave, we moved our operation to my apartment for 3 days. When our equipment requisitions mysteriously disappeared in the system, we bought our own and expensed it directly to the board-approved budget. Every obstacle made us more determined, more cohesive as a team. 3 months into my new role, Trevor called me to his office. I hadn't spoken to him directly since the board meeting. "Arwen," he greeted me without standing, without looking up from his computer. "I understand you've been making progress with Moontree." "Yes," I replied simply. "Good, good." He finally met my eyes. "You know, I've been thinking about our situation. Perhaps we got off on the wrong foot." I waited, saying nothing. "You've shown initiative," he continued. "That's admirable, but you're operating in isolation from the rest of the company. That's not sustainable." "What are you suggesting?" I asked. "I think it's time to integrate your project back into our main development structure. You'd still lead it, of course, but under our normal chain of command, with proper supervision and resources." There it was, the attempt to regain control, to put me back in my place. "The board approved my independent reporting structure," I reminded him. "The board responds to my recommendations," he countered. "Your trial period is only half over. A lot can change." As I left his office, I understood the message clearly: submit or be eliminated. I was still an inconvenience, a problem to be managed, not a person to be respected. The next week, 2 things happened. First, I received notification that my team's budget had been frozen pending a standard review process. Second, I learned that Trevor had scheduled a private meeting with Moontree without informing me. I gathered my team to explain the situation. "They're trying to take control of our project," Leona stated bluntly. "More likely they want to shut it down completely," Damon added. "If they can convince Moontree, it's better to start over with the proper team." Kit looked at me. "What do we do?" I considered our options. Fighting directly against Trevor meant fighting the entire corporate system, a system designed to protect people like him from people like me. "We finished the project," I said finally. "No matter what, for the next 2 weeks, we worked without pay. When we lost access to the company's servers, we built our own testing environment. When security started logging our entry and exit times, we found ways to work remotely. We met at coffee shops, libraries, and each other's apartments. The day before Trevor's meeting with Moontree, we finished the final version of our system. It was elegant, efficient, and did exactly what it promised. No bloat, no unnecessary features, just pure function. The morning of Trevor's meeting, I arrived at the office to find my access card deactivated. The security guard, Miguel, who'd known me for years, looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Arwen. New orders this morning." I nodded, understanding. "Is Moontree here yet?" "Their car's just pulled up," he confirmed, glancing at the monitor. "Miguel?" I said quietly. "I've brought you coffee every Monday for 7 years. I remembered your daughter's quinceañera and your son's graduation. I'm not asking you to risk your job, but I am asking for 5 minutes to talk to Diane Lockwood." He hesitated, then pressed the door release button. "I didn't see you," he said, looking away. I hurried through the lobby just as the Moontree team entered. Diane looked surprised to see me. "Arwen, I thought we were meeting with Trevor today." "You are," I confirmed, "but there's something you should know first." I handed her a small drive. "This is the completed system, ready for implementation." My team finished it despite having our budget frozen and access restricted. Philip, standing beside Diane, raised his eyebrows. "Why would your own company restrict your access?" "Because some people care more about control than success," I answered simply. Trevor emerged from the elevator, his practiced smile faltering when he saw me with the Moontree executives. "Arwen, this is unexpected. I thought you were taking personal time today." "I was misinformed," I replied calmly. "I came to present our completed project to Moontree." Trevor's smile tightened. "There must be some confusion. The project isn't ready for presentation. We're meeting today to discuss restructuring the development approach." "Actually," Diane held up the drive I'd given her. "Arwen says it is complete." Trevor's face darkened. "That's impossible and highly inappropriate. Arwen no longer has authorization to represent the company on this matter." "Since when?" Philip asked sharply. "As of this morning," Trevor admitted, after discovering some concerning irregularities in her team's processes. I could see Diane and Philip exchanging glances, calculating what was really happening. "Let's all take a breath," Diane suggested. "Why don't we test what Arwen's team has created, then continue our conversation?" The next hour unfolded in the main conference room. I connected the drive to the presentation system and walked through the completed product. It performed perfectly, meeting every requirement Moontree had specified. Trevor watched in silence, his expression growing darker as Diane and Philip asked questions, tested features, and nodded with approval. When the demonstration ended, slow applause started from the doorway. Several board members had quietly entered during the presentation. "Impressive," said Victor Reese, approaching the table, "especially considering the obstacles involved." Trevor stood. "Victor, this is an internal matter that is worth $50 million in contracted services," Victor finished. "The board has been monitoring this situation closely. We received some concerning reports about resource allocation." Trevor's face paled. "What reports?" "Mine," I said quietly. "I've documented every instance of interference with our project. Every budget freeze, every access restriction, every relocated office, all copied to the board's secure server." Trevor turned to Victor, his voice hardening. "She went outside the chain of command. She violated company protocols. She's been working on unauthorized servers with—" "She delivered," Victor interrupted, "which is more than your son managed with $23 million. The room went silent. Trevor looked from face to face, seeking an ally and finding none. "This company has existed for 27 years, he said finally. "I built it from nothing. One lucky project doesn't change that." "No," Victor agreed. "But a pattern of decisions based on nepotism rather than merit does concern us." The aftermath wasn't dramatic. Trevor wasn't fired. People at his level rarely are. Instead, the board restructured the company, creating 2 divisions. Trevor remained CEO of the Legacy Division, while I was named director of the New Innovation Division, with my own budget and reporting structure. It should have felt like victory, like justice. But real life isn't that simple. Every morning, Trevor and I now share the executive floor. We nod politely in the hallways, We attend the same leadership meetings. His office is still twice the size of mine. My team has grown to 15 people. We've secured 3 new clients based on our success with Moontree. My salary increased to 6 figures, more money than I'd ever imagined earning. But Trevor's power remains. He controls half the company. He has friends on the board. He still smiles at industry events, accepts awards, and gives interviews about his company's innovative approach. And every month, we both attend the executive review meeting where we report our division's progress. Every month, I present growth figures, while Trevor presents justifications for declining performance. Every month, I see the calculation in his eyes. How long until he finds a way to reclaim control, to erase this chapter from the company's story? This isn't the end of our battle. It's merely a different phase. I didn't get revenge in the way most people imagine it, with my enemy destroyed and me triumphant. Instead, I earned something both more valuable and more burdensome: a seat at the table, a voice that must be heard, the constant pressure to prove, again and again, that my first success wasn't luck. The true weight of achievement isn't in the moment of victory. It's in all the moments that follow, when you must live up to the standard you've set, when you can no longer be invisible. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If you found something valuable in my journey, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share in the comments anytime you've had to prove your worth despite others' doubt. Remember, sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one with the most to offer. They're just waiting for their moment to be heard.